Her name, for the purposes of this story, was Grandmother Yuki, and I want to be upfront that she is a composite, an illustrative stand-in for a pattern we see across hundreds of real records, not a single identifiable person. But the detail is real to thousands of women like her. Every morning in a small village in northern Okinawa, she walked 15 steps from her back door to a garden the size of a parking space, and she pulled up a purple-skinned sweet potato still warm from the soil. She steamed it. She ate it plain, sometimes with the skin still on. She did this 6 days a week for most of her adult life. She never called it a diet. It was just what there was to eat, and so it was what she ate. Here is the number that made researchers take her kind of life seriously. Okinawa has been home to the longest-running study of centenarians anywhere in the world, a research effort that began in 1975 and is still tracking data today. In 2005, Okinawa was formally recognized as one of the blue zones, a small handful of regions where people reach 100 at rates that dwarf the rest of their own countries. And when researchers pulled apart what these centenarians had actually been eating for the 50 and 60 years before anyone showed up with a clipboard, they kept landing on the same handful of foods, appearing over and over across totally different research teams working decades apart. That's the part I want you to sit with before we go further. This is not one study. This is a convergence. When the Japan Public Health Center cohort, a study that eventually tracked more than 140,000 people, went looking for dietary patterns tied to long-term health outcomes, certain food categories kept surfacing. When a separate team studying 40,530 adults in the Osaka region went looking for what predicted lower mortality, a different piece of the same puzzle showed up again. Different regions, different research groups, different decades, the same short list of foods kept correlating with the same outcome. Tonight I want to walk you through that list in the order it actually builds. Foundation first, because nobody sustains a total diet overhaul. Everybody can sustain one plate. The foundation is the sweet potato, specifically the deep purple variety known locally as beni imo. For much of the 20th century, researchers estimate this single tuber supplied roughly 60% of the total daily calories eaten by people living through that era in Okinawa, largely because it was one of the few crops that survived the region's frequent typhoons when other staples failed. That's not a wellness choice. That's an accident of geography that happened to be metabolically fortunate. Here is why it mattered. Refined rice and white potato both spike blood glucose quickly, forcing a sharp insulin response that, repeated daily across decades, wears on the systems that regulate blood sugar and vascular health. The purple sweet potato releases its sugars more slowly, and it carries something most starchy staples do not, a storage protein called sporamin. Peer-reviewed research on Okinawan sweet potatoes has documented that sporamin exhibits free radical scavenging activity, helping neutralize oxidative byproducts that accumulate in cells over a lifetime. The purple pigment itself is also rich in anthocyanins, the same antioxidant family found in blueberries. So Tier 1 is not exotic, it is a starch swap. The action is exactly that simple. At your next meal that would normally include a refined starch, replace it with a roasted sweet potato, skin on, ideally a purple or deep orange variety, not an occasional side dish, the default. Once that foundation is in place, Tier 2 is soy, and here I need to be honest because the research is more contested than Tier 1. Okinawans have historically eaten roughly 8 times more tofu than the average American does today, according to longevity researchers who documented the region's food habits for decades. Soy shows up daily as the default protein alongside miso. The proposed mechanism runs through isoflavones, plant compounds that interact with estrogen receptors and appear, in some population studies, to influence inflammatory and hormonal pathways tied to certain cancers. But the picture is not tidy. One arm of the Japan Public Health Center study, following 83,063 men and women, did not find a uniformly protective signal for soy across colorectal cancer. A separate arm, following 21,852 women, found that frequent miso soup and isoflavone consumption was associated with reduced breast cancer risk. Yet another analysis of soy and prostate cancer mortality in Japanese men found an association running in the opposite direction from what researchers expected. Soy's relationship to cancer outcomes clearly differs by cancer type and by sex. What a broader pooled review does show with more consistency is that soy product consumption was associated with lower incidence of gastrointestinal cancer overall, an effect that appeared stronger in women than in men. I'm telling you this because a channel that only shares the flattering half of the data isn't worth your trust. The Okinawan pattern doesn't prove soy prevents cancer. It shows a population that ate a moderate, whole food, fermented form of soy daily for generations, alongside everything else on this list, and lived unusually long. Soy is one thread in a rope, not the rope itself. The second half of Tier 2 is a clearer signal. Green tea. The Osaka cohort study, published in the Journal of the American Medical Association in 2006, followed 40,530 Japanese adults and found higher green tea consumption associated with meaningfully reduced all-cause and cardiovascular mortality. A later pooled analysis combining 8 separate Japanese cohort studies covering 313,381 people followed for an average of 17.3 years, found the same inverse relationship. 2 independent efforts, a combined sample well over 350,000 people, agreeing on direction. That kind of convergence across independent data is worth taking seriously. So Tier 2 in practice is a modest daily serving of minimally processed tofu, miso, or edamame, treated as one part of the picture rather than a cure by itself, and unsweetened green tea in place of at least 1 sugared beverage a day, not 4 cups forced down out of obligation, 1 or 2 consistently for years, which is the only time scale this data was ever collected on. Tier 3 is the one people skip because it looks less like nutrition and more like manners. Bitterness and restraint. Bitter melon, known locally as Goya, is a fixture of the traditional Okinawan plate, most famously in the stir-fry dish Goya champuru. Field research on the traditional diet has pointed to compounds in bitter melon that appear to support glucose regulation. The exact mechanism is still being refined in the literature, but the pattern is consistent. A vegetable most modern eaters avoid because of its taste turns out to be doing metabolic work precisely because of that taste. Bitterness in plants is frequently a marker for the same polyphenol compounds tied to antioxidant activity elsewhere in this story. The second half of Tier 3 isn't a food, it's a habit called hara, hachi, bu, a Confucian-influenced practice of stopping a meal when you feel roughly 80% full. Researchers studying the broader Okinawan pattern have noted this combination, low glycemic load, antioxidant-dense vegetables, and habitual mild caloric restraint, produced a population that was naturally calorically restricted without being malnourished, structurally comparable to other well-studied protective diets like the DASH pattern. Nobody was counting calories. They were following a cultural rule about when to put the chopsticks down. Tier 3 in practice is this. Work 1 bitter vegetable into your week, bitter melon if you can find it, otherwise a bitter green like radicchio or dandelion. And at your largest meal of the day, try eating until comfortably satisfied rather than full, and notice what that 80% point actually feels like, because most of us have lost the ability to recognize it. Let's bring the tiers together, because the mistake most people make is picking the single most interesting fact and bolting it onto an otherwise unchanged plate. The data describes a system. The slow-release starch reduces the glycemic load of the whole meal. The soy and green tea work on inflammatory and cardiovascular pathways over years, not days. The bitter vegetables and the habit of stopping short of full round out a pattern of moderate intake sustained for a lifetime rather than attempted for a single January. None of these elements was ever tested in isolation by the people who actually lived this way. They ate the whole plate every day for decades without a name for what they were doing. Here is the one thing to do today. Go find a sweet potato, purple if your store carries it, orange if it doesn't, and roast it tonight in place of whatever refined starch you'd normally reach for. Skin on. That's tier 1, day 1, the same starting point that, multiplied across 60 years, sits underneath the story of a woman who never once thought of her sweet potato patch as an intervention. I've put together the full walkthrough of this pattern and 3 others like it from different corners of the world in something I'm calling the Old World Table, a week-by-week framework with the specific swaps and the honest caveats in the research adapted for a normal Western kitchen. You'll find the link below if you want the whole system laid out rather than pieced together one video at a time. If this kind of sourced look into how the longest-lived people on Earth actually eat is useful to you, stay with this channel and subscribe. We go one region, one population, one real study at a time, and I want to know from you. Of these 3, the sweet potato, the soy and green tea, or the bitterness and restraint, which one is already sitting in your kitchen right now without you ever thinking of it as protective? Tell me in the comments. I read every one, and they shape which population we study next.